Today, I thought I would explain leaky gut, and we can talk a little bit about the conditions associated, what causes leaky gut, how testing can help us to figure it out, and also some strategies to help heal the gut. All right, so I like this diagram here. It kind of shows us the transition from healthy gut to an imbalance or dysbiosis all the way to leaky gut. So over here, when we look at the healthy gut, we can see the enterocytes here. These are the cells that line the intestinal lining, and it's actually one cell layer thick. And in the small intestine, one of the reasons we want it to be one cell layer thick is this is where we absorb our nutrients. So when we talk about it being a leaky gut, normally we say it's hyperpermeable because there's always a little bit of permeability to allow food and nutrients through, and then little bits of, we call them antigens, but those are things that help to train the immune system. So we'll talk in more detail. But one of the first things I notice here too is just this nice thick mucus barrier. So this mucus barrier really helps to protect these cells, and it also houses some of the beneficial microbes, some enzymes and things. So this mucus layer is very important and also helps to keep out pathogens or infections that could cause problems for us. And then you can see here, the cells are right next to each other. These are called tight junctions. They hold those cells together. And so you can see this is really a nice barrier. Not a lot of things are going to get through here unless they're supposed to. And then, of course, for the diagram, you can see here, this is the blood vessel. And down here we have the GALT, that stands for gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And this is where a lot of the immune cells reside. And believe it or not, about 70 to 80% of our entire immune system is in the gut. And that's another reason why having a healthy gut is so critical for our overall health. And so then when we look to the dysbiosis, and I really think of dysbiosis as more of an imbalance. So you can have all of the normal flora, but you might have too many of one, not enough of another. I really like to think about the gut like an ecosystem. You would never want an ecosystem where half of the animals were tigers and the rest were, a variety of others. That would just be an imbalanced ecosystem, for example. So, you can see here we've got some bad bacteria. Now you can see the tight junctions between these two cells here. They're gone, they're damaged. And so of course this is creating a break in that barrier where things can kind of leak into the bloodstream and start to activate an immune response. And you can also compare too, so we had this nice thick mucus barrier in a healthy gut. Here we see that mucus is greatly reduced. There's not even mucus protecting this part of the cell. And that's another really important defense for a healthy gut. And then, of course, if we have these undigested foods or bacterial fragments, especially leaking into the bloodstream, then we start to produce inflammation. The immune cells are like, wait a minute, undigested food and bacterial fragments don't belong in the bloodstream. And that's when we start to see the immune system show up. And that's when you might start to notice a little bit of symptoms. I will say, early dysbiosis, it might just be a little discomfort. And everyone can experience that in different ways. Some people are more prone to actual, physical pain in the stomach. Some people might notice skin symptoms. Some people might notice brain symptoms, especially when we get over here into leaky gut. Now you can see we don't just have problems with the tight junctions that hold those enterocytes or those intestinal cells together. Now we actually see damage to the enterocytes. Of course, the more damaged this barrier becomes, the more things will leak into the bloodstream, the more of an immune response, the more inflammation we'll have. We'll start making antibodies. So, this process can definitely get pretty bad over here. And so I think it's really important to understand, what are some of the conditions associated with leaky gut? And I think maybe perhaps a better question is what conditions aren't associated with leaky gut? But, just to give a really high level overview, autoimmunity, absolutely. We've known that leaky gut is one of the components in addition to genetic susceptibility involved in pretty much all autoimmune conditions. Gastrointestinal problems, irritable bowel syndrome, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, Crohn's, colitis, eosinophilic esophagitis, pretty much any type of gastrointestinal issue can have this leaky gut component. And then, believe it or not, metabolic and endocrine issues. So, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, polycystic ovarian syndrome, fatty liver. And so think about how common these are in the population, and knowing that this leaky gut is a component of that is really important. And then mood disorders, brain symptoms, so depression and anxiety, there's tons of research looking at the whole gut-brain connection. And when the gut is out of balance, that can drive inflammation, that can affect the blood-brain barrier, that's linked with, in addition to anxiety, depression, neurological issues, Alzheimer's, cognitive decline. So addressing that's really important. Of course, allergies, MCAS or mast cell activation syndrome, histamine issues, that can be driven by a dysbiotic or imbalanced gut and leaky gut. And then just, fatigue, even things like endometriosis now they're finding is linked to lipopolysaccharide. That's part of this gram-negative bacterial fragment. So it's in the cell membrane of the gram-negative bacteria. It's called lipopolysaccharide. We also call that endotoxin because it's a toxin from within, but that when that leaks into the bloodstream and that really activates a very powerful inflammatory immune response, and that lipopolysaccharide or endotoxin again is linked with all of these conditions I just mentioned. So, I think another important thing to talk about is what are some of the things that cause a leaky gut? Again, there's a lot of things. Some people genetically are more prone to a leaky gut. That is something I love testing in my patients, just looking at genetic susceptibilities and then also epigenetic changes. Um, Of course, diet plays a huge role in the gut microbiome. So if we're eating ultra processed food, eating artificial sugars, things with preservatives, food coloring, all of those things are really, really bad for our gut. Even not having not enough fiber can be a problem for a healthy gut. Nutrient deficiency. So vitamins A, D, and zinc, those are critical for a healthy gut barrier. And, if we're not eating those nutrients or if we have higher needs for those, that can definitely impact the gut lining. Lifestyle. So just stress alone can drive leaky gut. And I think about how stressed we are as a society. So this is where mindfulness can be really helpful. Whatever that looks like for you, everyone has the thing that helps with their stress resilience, but definitely think about that. Poor sleep can disrupt the microbiome. So just like we have a sleep and circadian rhythm, our microbes have a circadian rhythm. Food input can also impact our circadian rhythm. So eating right before bed can disrupt our sleep. It can disrupt our microbiome circadian rhythm. Things like alcohol, smoking, we all know they're not good for us, but they do impact the gut barrier. Prescriptions, antibiotics, proton pump inhibitors, there's a lot of other prescriptions that can disrupt the gut, especially with long-term use. Although I'm not saying medications, sometimes they're very needed, but you might need to do some additional gut support to fix the imbalance that they might cause. And then environment's a huge one. Air pollution can cause leaky gut. And then we have to think about all of the pesticides, herbicides, insecticides we spray on our food. Of course, that gets into the air. Heavy metals, environmental mold. I talk about that quite a bit. So if you have water damage in your home, you can get this toxic soup of mold and bacteria growing. That will also disrupt the microbiome. And then infections. So if you've had food poisoning or something called post-infectious IBS, certain types of microbes that cause food poisoning can lead to damage in the little neurons in the gut that can set us up for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And so, of course, there's plenty of other infections. Viral infections can disrupt the gut, parasites, and more. So, how do we figure this out? This is where testing can be really helpful. So, I do use quite a few different advanced lab tests. One of my favorite ones is takes a really deep dive into the gut. So, we look at digestion. So, is your liver gallbladder producing enough bile acids to digest your fats and absorb your fat soluble nutrients? Is your pancreas producing enough enzymes? What does it look like? Do you have undigested food in your stool? Are we seeing high amounts of undigested protein or vegetable fibers. So that piece is really critical. We also look at the total microbiome and is there enough of a balance? Do you have the right amount of the good guys? Is it well balanced with some of those opportunistic infections? So it's, things like Candida or some of those gram-negative bacteria. We want them in the gut as part of a healthy microbiome, but we don't want them to overgrow and we don't want them to start to behave badly or to become pathogenic. In addition, we can look at inflammatory markers that will clue us in again to what's going on. How can we best support and treat that person? And now we've got some autoimmune markers that we can look at as well, just to see again what is driving the inflammatory process or the gut problems that we're seeing. Another whole set of tests I like to do is nutrients. So if we don't have all of the nutrients our body needs to heal and be healthy, that can be a hindrance to getting our health back. And when it comes to gut health, the nutrients that are absolutely critical for this healthy gut lining over here are vitamins D, A, and zinc. I actually see a lot of vitamin D deficiency unless someone is supplementing. Most people just aren't getting enough natural sun exposure. Zinc, you don't want to supplement zinc unless you know you're deficient, but it is a fairly common deficiency. And then same with vitamin A. I don't recommend supplementing unless you know you're deficient because too much vitamin A can be a problem. But again, when someone has poor digestion, a lot of times I see poor fat digestion, which means poor fat soluble nutrient digestion, and low vitamins A, D, also E and K, and sometimes CoQ10 as well. So really making sure we optimize nutrients can be another help. And then we can look at genetics. I mentioned that earlier. Some people are more genetically susceptible to having gut imbalances. So we know for them, we need to really be extra protective of gut health. And so finally, the question is, how do we fix the gut? How do we heal this? Well, you probably got some clue just me talking through all the possible, well, some of the possible causes for this leaky gut problem over here. So it's really about addressing what's out of balance for each individual. So if someone is super stressed and not sleeping well, we definitely want to focus on stress resilience, figuring out what's impairing their sleep. If someone is eating a highly processed diet, we want to slowly transition them to whole foods with fiber-rich foods. Now, I want to say we have to go slowly for some people because if someone's used to eating a lot of ultra-processed foods and they've been feeding those pathogens, those bad microbes, if we switch to a really healthy diet too fast, those microbes can start to die off and make us feel really yucky. So it can actually be helpful to go more slowly. Another thing that can happen is if we introduce too much fiber too fast, we can't break that down. We don't have enough of the microbes that can metabolize that. So we can end up with a lot of discomfort. So again, go slowly with diet changes, especially if you've been eating a lot of ultra processed foods. I talked a little bit about optimizing nutrients. Of course, avoiding smoking and alcohol as much as you can would be really important. Medications, there's a time and a place, but the goal is not to be on them long term. If you've had to be on a round of antibiotics, for example, some strategies to, repair and balance the gut microbiome. So probiotics, prebiotics, those things can all be really helpful. And then really just doing our best to avoid toxins and infections. And so when it comes to toxic exposures, a really simple rule is to really focus on getting clean food, clean air, clean water. So clean food, organic when possible, minimally processed, clean air. I am a big fan of air purifiers in the home. Of course, getting fresh air is also good. And then clean water. So if you think about how much water we really should be drinking every day, if that water is not purified, we could be getting in a lot of contaminants. And unfortunately, we've got everything from microplastics to heavy metals, pharmaceuticals. We've got a lot of stuff in our water these days. So maybe I'll do another video about water in the future. So again, just to kind of recap, you can kind of see what it takes to have a healthy gut. Again, this protective mucus barrier is critical. Nice, healthy, tight junctions. We want vitamins D, A, and zinc to keep this healthy. We want healthy whole foods. adequate sleep, stress resilience, sunshine, a lot of things to keep the gut healthy. Dysbiosis, this can happen from so many reasons. And of course, it can go all the way over to this leaky gut over here if it goes unchecked for too long. So I hope you found this helpful. Feel free to comment. I'd love to know if there's any other videos that you'd like me to share. Thanks again.